Vantor, delivering sovereign spatial intelligence that gives nations the ground truth.
Hello and welcome back. I'm recording this from the South Coast, where I've been house-sitting for a few days, and I had hoped to bring a sort of mellow, relaxed podcast with some themes about uncrewed systems. Now, all of that changed on Sunday when the news came through from Singapore, the rather startling news, that when it comes to AUKUS Pillar One and Virginia-class submarines, Australia will no longer be receiving, as had previously been planned, 2 second-hand Virginia-class submarines and then a new one, but the new one has been dropped and we will be getting a third second-hand one. These are submarines of about 15 years old. Now, what has upset me about this is not only the significance of the news itself, which I'll get to in a moment, but the way that our Defence Minister Richard Marles has tried to spin this as some sort of amazing, positive development based on the fact that rather than having to support 2 slightly different classes of submarine, we'll now only have to support a single one. And that indeed makes sense. But this has been blown up into being this just most amazing, positive development that it's just further proof of how wonderfully all of this is going. Now, I take a contrary view. I believe this decision is deeply humiliating to Australia, and especially humiliating to all of the AUKUS, all is going fantastically well cheer squad of Defence Minister Richard Marles and Admirals Meade and Hammond, to name just 3 of the most prominent ones, and of course this vast throng of AUKUS boosters who go along with everything and anything that the US does. Now, here are the main questions, in my opinion, that the government, and Minister Marles in particular, need to answer. If acquiring 3 second-hand Virginias rather than 2 used and 1 new one is such a wonderful idea, why has it taken so long to make this change? The issues of simplicity of supporting a single class has been known since day one. Now, Defence Minister Marles says this decision will take pressure off the US industrial base. Yes, well, it might. I mean, this is an issue that I've been doing my best to highlight and which the government has been downplaying. And hopefully I'll have time to provide a bit more evidence of how the US industrial base is struggling. So we've gone from a situation of about 72 hours ago, when the official position of the government was the US industrial base is fine, to now saying, as justification or partial justification, this takes pressure off it. Now, they both can't be right, so either someone was lying to us previously or they're lying to us now. But anyway, let's be charitable. Let's say it's true that this does take pressure off the US industrial base to churn out new Virginia-class submarines. Well, if it's true, why are we continuing to funnel another $2 billion to this US industrial base on top of the $3 billion that we have already given, if there is no longer any need to do so? Clearly, if the US industrial base now has had pressure taken off it, we can save that $2 billion and no longer transfer money that, frankly, the US no longer needs. Now, there are a whole lot of other issues, including, I'm curious, when did the US notify us of this decision? Now, again, I see that Minister Marles is sort of trying to spin it, saying, oh, well, it's, cooperation and lengthy discussions and things like that. I have seen no evidence of this. In a direct sense, I wouldn't, because, of course, all of these things are conducted in utmost secrecy. What I will say is that there has been no sign, no hint, not the slightest hint, that there has been any sort of rethink going on. As regular listeners to this podcast will know, or people who just follow the media generally, the line that has come out of the government incessantly is that there is a plan, that they're sticking to it, that there will be no changes to the plan whatsoever. The plan is in fantastic shape. And now we're expected to believe that, oh no, the plan has been under constant revision for a couple of years. I simply do not believe it. I think that the situation that we are now in is that people in the United States have had a look at their struggling industrial base, they've had a look at Australia, they've had a look at our needs, and they have decided for us there's no way we are going to sell these Aussies any new submarines. We will give them second-hand 15-year-old submarines. I'll come to a bit more of that in a moment. So following on from that, when did the US notify us of this? How much advanced warning did we receive before the Singapore announcement? Now, another curious part of all of this, which has long puzzled me, and we might now have an opportunity to find out a bit more, Richard Marles has always said Australia has a treaty-level agreement with the United States for the delivery of Virginia-class submarines. I've asked before, which is it? Is it a treaty or is it an agreement? You can't have both. It's either a treaty or an agreement. Now, whatever it is, how was it varied to reflect 3 used rather than 2 used plus 1 Virginia-class submarine? Has there been some sort of treaty renegotiation or some sort of contract amendment? In the absence of any of that sort of stuff happening, that just reinforces my view that this decision has been dictated to us by the United States, and now the government and all of the AUKUS boosters have fallen in line, and they are retrospectively coming up with all of these stories to make it sound as good, to make it sound as palatable as possible. Now, it is, yes, pick on Minister Marles morning, because he is at the very heart of all of this. He says that this new direction will also result in significant savings. Wow, great. But how much are those savings? If they cannot be calculated because the US will not tell us what the cost of a second-hand Virginia-class submarine is, let alone a new one, how can we calculate what the savings are when the numbers aren't known? If they cannot be calculated, how can the minister possibly claim that they will be significant? I mean, they might be, but where's the evidence? And anyway, what does significant mean in the context of a $368 billion program? Now, here's another very important point that I have seen no one pick up on. Mind you, I haven't had the opportunity or the means to read everything that has been written or said about this, but the original plan, as everyone knows, was 2 used plus 1 new plus a further 2 new Virginia-class submarines in the event that SSN AUKUS, the British-designed nuclear-powered submarine, runs late, as I think it certainly will. So what is the status now of these final 2 new Virginia-class submarines? If that still goes ahead, Australia will then be back in exactly the same position that we are in today, or rather we were in 72 hours ago before the announcement was made, of having 2 different classes of Virginias to support. So is the idea now that we will receive 5 used Virginia-class submarines in the name of simplicity? These are pretty big questions, and I hope that somebody has the opportunity to put them to Minister Marles and Admirals Meade and Hammond in the near future. Now, for the record, I'm going to read out a section of the Singapore statement. This is so that people don't have to, read hard copies of things. It's just one paragraph. It says, "The Deputy Prime Minister, I say, better known to people as the Defence Minister, but for reasons presumably of ego, insists on the Deputy Prime Minister title. The DPM and secretaries, that's Secretaries of Defence or War, Hegseth and his UK counterpart, welcomed the proposed approach to streamline Australia's acquisition of Virginia-class submarines, simplifying supply chain management, operational and maintenance requirements, and maximising cost efficiencies. This approach would enable Australia to acquire 3 in-service Virginia-class submarines in lieu of a mixture of new and in-service variants." Yes, exactly. Why now? Why not have followed that methodology right from the beginning? Again, I say the spin on this has been appalling, and I think it's to the shame of many of my colleagues in the mainstream media who are just lapping this up, repeating this notion that, forget about new, we'll go all second-hand submarines, is just the most wonderful idea that's ever been generated. No, it's not. Now, what else? Perhaps that's why in Singapore at the Shangri-La Dialogue, Richard Marles was also emphasising work that's going to be taken now on uncrewed vessels in some sort of tri-nation deal, again with the UK and the US. And as people know, I'm a huge fan of uncrewed systems. By coincidence, as I say, I was planning to spend a chunk of time on the topic in this podcast. But I'm not sure how much of what Minister Marles and his US and UK counterparts have had to say is particularly new. As far as I'm aware, neither Australia nor the US has so far committed any funding to further work on uncrewed systems. I saw the UK has announced about 200 million or so on sensors for uncrewed systems, but sensors aren't much use unless you've got platforms from which to operate them. So let's see what happens there. I saw that emphasis on uncrewed stuff as a distraction from awkward questions that some people, not all, are starting to ask about the Virginia-class submarines. What else? Now, last week, also, there was a conference in Perth, the Indian Ocean Defence Seminar. I couldn't attend. We just don't have the budget to do that. And, of course, there was discussion about AUKUS, and I noticed that the former Chief of Navy, our Chief of Defence Force, Mark Hammond, made the comment on the record, you can read all about it, that the problems going on with AUKUS are that it's becoming politicised. Well, in my opinion, this is total crap. Who is politicising AUKUS? To my knowledge, no one at all is trying to turn it into a political, Labour versus coalition fight. In fact, that's one of the problems, that Labour and the coalition have been lockstep in boosting AUKUS. All that we critics of AUKUS, or sceptics, are trying to do is to find out what the F is going on. There's nothing political about that. And if our government and Navy were a bit more transparent and a bit more honest, people would not be having the level of concern that they have now. Now, I've come across this idea before that if you aren't fully behind AUKUS, you must be, pro-China or pro-Iran or pro-North Korea. It's all total nonsense. People are entitled to know what is going on, and I have zero sympathy for Richard Marles or Admirals Hammond and Meade, but because this problem is one of their own making. And if they had been more open and honest all along, we would have a better understanding of what is happening, but by sneering at any questions and refusing to provide information, it's hardly surprising that there are now some negative reactions going on. And I'll briefly toot my own horn, if people don't mind, by referring to a very early podcast I made a couple of years ago, referring to the satirical comedic character Vice Rear Cabin Boy Sir Bobo Gargle. And in that episode, I created a scenario where Bobo was explaining to a credulous defence minister that the older the submarine was, the better off Australia would be. That was satire, but this is the territory we are now living in. We are told that old is better than new. What else? I also noticed that Joe Hockey, former treasurer, former ambassador to the United States, treasurer on the Liberal side of things, and a consistent AUKUS booster, he also has recently expressed his doubts about US production capacity and is saying that he wonders whether Australia will receive submarines as promised. Well done, Joe Hockey. Better late than never. So let's talk some details, as again I try to do, rather than just use empty rhetoric, as AUKUS supporters do. Now, people might not know this, but the USN actually has something called the Submarine Industrial Base Program Office, and it aims by 2028 to produce 3 nuclear-powered submarines per year in the United States. That's 1 huge Columbia-class SSBN, the Navy's #1 priority, and 2 Virginia SSNs. And the USN, of course, also has a huge number of surface ship programs underway. Now, the Submarine Industrial Base Program Office, this is the official USN office, believes that to meet this demand, an extra 250,000, an extra 250,000 skilled workers are needed over the next 10 years. The 2 submarine building yards of Huntington Ingalls Industries and General Dynamic Electric Boat have been on a hiring spree, but this is almost matched by attrition rates in some key areas. The Submarine Industrial Base Program Office says it's 10%, 20%, even 30% hemorrhaging in certain skill sectors, and the highest attrition rates are in the first year of employment. The Submarine Industrial Base Program Office says that, and this is now kind of a direct quote, due to the physical nature of a lot of the work, welding, pipe fitting, electrical, as well as rigid schedules, many workers are pivoting to adjacent sectors like manufacturing, data centers, and construction, often because of more flexible working conditions. Now, previously I speculated that they might be going to, retail or hospitality. No, the USN Program Office says that it's adjacent industries. So the office also points out that at the same time as young people are reluctant to stay, at the same time, these yards are losing older institutional workers, with the SIB Program Office calculating that 27% of the maritime workforce is more than 55 years old. Ouch! That's obviously a looming train wreck. As the older, very experienced workers retire and new people aren't joining fast enough, it's going to be a mess, or even more of a mess than it is at the moment. The hardest trades to hire, not surprisingly, are those that require specific skill sets: welders, machinists, electricians, fabricators. And the Program Office also points out that urban centres with high costs of living have an even harder time, such as San Diego or Pearl Harbor, in recruiting people to join. I had been hoping to discuss the ongoing mess in the United States, where clearly there is a seismic difference in the negotiating positions of the US and Iran, but I've run out of time. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye for now, and see you next time.
Vantor delivers sovereign spatial intelligence so nations can own the ground truth. See how at vantor.com.